the profound moment in Vasari, which I think will inform almost everything that we say from here on out, right, is where he makes this flip and he says, yeah, from a certain point of view, art develops from these rudiments and gradually people make improvements. And you start with a modern version of this story might be like you start with cave paintings and then gradually the cave paintings become more sophisticated and eventually you start to see this development. But it was all already perfect when God created the universe. And mankind is the ultimate sculpture. And this is taken right out of scripture when he says this, because of course, the Hebrew way of talking, one of the many Hebrew ways of talking about God's creation of man is as the potter, right, who sculpts the clay. And Paul picks this up in his letter to the Romans. This is, again, an idea with an ancient pedigree that God is the supreme artist. And it's not even, limited to Judeo-Christian scripture. We could talk about the Timaeus, right? Plato's Timaeus, in which there is this kind of one demiurge, right? This craftsman who's like a kind of, he's like a smith at the forge, right? Or he's like a painter with a grand design. He has this kind of image in his mind, which is cashed out in Aristotle, right? In this notion of the kind of formal cause, right? Why does a flower develop the way that it is? Well, because it is such and such a kind of thing. And this created universe, which already has a perfect picture of things, right, is essential in order to tell any story about artistic progress. And this is something that, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. But it's the kind of thing that's so unpopular or kind of cringy to say in 21st century America that it's very easy to lose track of this. The very notion that there's such a thing as good, better, and best art, that art could develop in a positive direction, and perfect and become perfect, right? Or perfect itself or reach more perfection. All of this depends on the notion that before any artist picks up any brush or hammers any, block of marble, there exists in some pure mind the perfection of form and order and truth and beauty that we are all kind of aspiring to. And that's why art can be a mimesis, right? It can be not just kind of a random thing that happens to look pretty, or not just, the thing that someone happens to throw at a wall, the spaghetti that we throw at a wall and the marks that it makes, but actually a kind of insight, right? This apocryphal story that we get. It's not just attributed to Michelangelo, but also to some Eastern painters as well and sculptors. That how do you paint, or rather, how do you carve a tiger? Well, you start with a block of wood or a block of marble, and you carve away everything that doesn't look like a tiger. And this is the fundamental kind of idea in Vasari, is that because we have this Christian notion that the universe is divinely ordered and that there is harmony and proportion and form and reason in it, right? Which we might also attribute to the Stoics too, right? That there's like a logos flowing through creation, through the material world. It's not just gunk and stuff that we move around. It actually has a form and it has a plan and an ordered shape, right? All of that is essential if you're going to say well, what are artists doing? They're not just messing around, and it's not just art aesthetically neutral what they do. They're actually trying to convey something. They're trying to reflect the universe back at itself, because the universe in itself has a plan, is the product of a mind, and because we are minds in God's image, right? We reflect that order and that harmony, proportion, form, beauty, grace, right? All of these things back at the universe when we sculpt things in marble, when we paint things, when we draw things, right? And so this fundamental idea about what makes good art is the linchpin, right, that enables Vasari to even tell a story at all. The whole notion of art history, right, which he's basically inventing in real time, is a theological notion. And what's so fascinating to me about this is it's the same idea that's going to underpin the birth of science, right? Because of course now we think of science as this, aggressively secular force that just kind of debunks all supernatural ideas. But it was not that initially in conception at all. I mean, there was a kind of, Enlightenment skepticism that creeped in, and that was part of the idea that, we're going to try to get to just what we can know ourselves objectively through reason. But there's also, of course, a strong historical strain in Newton, for instance, right, of believing that the world can be understood because it is the product of a mind, right? Because if it's not the product of a mind, then why should we assume that our minds would have any kind of, rational way of grasping it or giving it order or describing the order in it, right? And so in this way, Renaissance art and the kind of development of modern science spring out of very much the same impulse. And that is the kind of light bulb that goes on where you're saying, well, okay, if the cosmos is divinely ordered by one great mind, then human minds in the image of that great mind, right, have a kind of job to do, which is discovering and affirming and giving kind of vision to, reflecting that universe, that divinely ordered universe back at itself.